Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the second part in a series of discussions that we're holding on the future of work. My name is Brian Kelly. I'm the president of the Small Business Association of Michigan. And my first task today is to introduce the moderator of this panel, this discussion that we'll be having, which is Lynn Jarman Johnson. And as I do that, though, I want to point out, acknowledge the outstanding work that Consumers Credit Union has done over the course of the last year in dealing with small businesses, helping small businesses to make it through this pandemic, whether it was building the Paycheck Protection Program, kind of building the system in the air in real time as the program was being laid out by the feds in Washington, D.C., or working with community members on the ground in establishing the changes that they needed in their financial services relationship because of the dramatic and difficult struggles that came with this pandemic. Really, we at the association and our members could not ask for a better partner than Consumers Credit Union. So with that, I want to turn it over to Lynn Jarman Johnson, the Chief Marketing Officer for Consumers Credit Union.
Brian, thank you so much. And it has been a true honor. We're talking this week about our back to the office plans. And I'll tell you what, there's nothing better than being able to have the type of partnership that we have built, and much of it over a screen. And that's really what our focus is today, about talking about the future of work. This three-part webinar series has been just fantastic already. And today, I think, is a component that we're going to focus on that is truly about setting the stage for having employees come back to the office. And how do we empower our employees to do their best work? And then on Thursday, May 20, join us, because the fun begins on designing spaces. And at Consumers right now, we are actually changing the way that many of our spaces are designed. And so Progressive A&E is here to help us with that too. So it's been a really wonderful partnership. If you do have question and answers throughout this seminar, please just join them in, hop on in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we address all those Q&As today. I am so excited and so proud to introduce you to the three panelists that we have today to really focus on empowering our employees, the people that you work alongside of day to day. Jeff Visser is the Chief Sales Officer for Consumers Credit Union, and literally is helping with the face-to-face, the people that are helping you do your banking. And then we also have Brian, of course, who just introduced me. Thanks, Brian, again. And Mary Van Sciver. And Mary is with Progressive A&E. She's a consultant who really helps you listen, think about, and hone in on how to make sure we get the best workspace for our employees. Now, here's an interesting fact, and I think every single one of us is talking about this. Think back to even starting at the beginning of the week. All of a sudden, we heard that in 2 weeks, we can start going back into the office. There was a study that was done by Thomas Allen. He's a professor, and it's called the Allen effect. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or not, but what is interesting is in the office work environment, where you are sitting and who you are sitting next to has dramatic effect on how you communicate in your office. And the study showed that if you were sitting 50 meters apart from an individual, you might as well be on another planet. Well, you know what? The last year and a half, we've been on another planet. So today we're trying to figure out how we can, you know what, let's talk about the screen, and let's talk about the fears that are out there, but also the excitement of getting back to work and sitting, near someone safe that you need to collaborate with on a day-to-day basis. So let's find out from you. Let's take a little poll here quick. What is your plan to return to the office? So think about this a minute and tell me, are you already back in the office? Do you already have that plan set? Have you been working full steam? Are you going to have a full plan as soon as possible? Are you slowly rolling back into the office? Do you have stages of that? And are you planning a hybrid model of some sort that helps with having some people be remote and some people be back in the office? Is that the way that it's going to be? So if you guys will take a moment and fill that panel out, let's see what the poll answers are in a second. there was a, oh, here we go. So 33% are already back in the office. Full return as soon as possible. Look at this, you guys, it's 0. Rolling back is 17%, and a hybrid, a whopping 50%. Now that really does tell the tale, doesn't it, about what's going on and the differences. So today, that's what the excitement is, telling you about all of the different ideas that are out there to get people excited about returning back into the office. So let's start with, how are we balancing the organizational needs with personal preferences? This is not an easy one, is it? You know, if you have been used to working in your home and you don't like the commute, or you're thinking this is much easier, there's a difference though between, well, being in the office, being face-to-face, as we just talked about. So what is the plan that you have? Well, obviously 50% say it. Brian, you're talking every single day to so many organizations. Have you seen that there is just a lot of different opportunities out there?
There really is, and there's not a single answer to this question of how you transition back. Some businesses, because of the nature of the business, maybe have been in the whole time. There are other businesses that have been largely remote the whole time, and so there's dealings and insight and information that I have from members, but also our association is going through this same thing. Thursdays today happens to be a day that a small handful of us are regularly in the office to deal with some things that can't be done remotely. But the vast majority of the time, I would say probably about 90% of SBAM has been remote over the course of the last year. And there are many office environments that have been similar to that. And so as we move forward now, I think it's really important that this question, how do we balance the needs of the organization with the preferences and frankly, the requirements that many employees have this far into the pandemic. So the first thing is, you have to meet the needs of the organization. And the question is, how many of those needs can be met in person, and how many or must be met in person, and how many can be done remotely. And I think the last year has proved that there are a lot of ways to get to this answer, a lot of ways to make sure that the work gets done. What we don't fully know yet is what we're missing out on in terms of collaboration, those kind of unplanned interactions where ideas bounce off each other, or a conversation is overheard, or something comes to mind and I wouldn't think, oh, I'm going to do a Zoom call with my coworker, but if they were just 2 offices down, I might just walk down and say, hey, let me run something by you. Those types of interactions, I think, are the things that it's difficult to capture them in a purely remote environment. And so as we balance those needs, I think creating collaboration and being intentional about collaboration is going to be really important, even for those positions that largely can effectively be done remotely. The other thing is to as a manager, I look at it like I need to check my own personal opinions at the door when it comes to my conversations with employees. So the people that work in this space and in the SBAM world, I have ideas about how I'd like things to go, but other people have preferences as well. And it should be, especially for smaller organizations, taking into consideration the feelings, the concerns, the preferences of others to the extent that you can while meeting the needs of the organization will be, I think, more important than ever, especially in a labor market like we have right now. Believe me when I tell you that that people have options. So employees have more options today than ever. A lot of employers are desperate to find people. So doing what you have to do to accommodate and hold on to your employees is probably going to be a good long-term move.
Brian, there was an article today in MLive, an editor, his name is John Hines. He wrote an editorial today that I think was spot on, and it talked about the fact that going back to work and even having hybrid work might be difficult because of what you just talked about. Jeff, I'm gonna go to you, because what his focus on was soft skills and hard skills. And the editorial focused on the fact that if you have hard skills done, you know what I mean? And that's the stuff that we do day to day, you know, the getting the office ready, having the times that we're going to be doing something. Do we have the tools that we need to communicate? But the soft skills is the winning component. And there are many different opinions on when we talk about soft skills, about those conversations, how we're getting back into the office. So how is it that you are handling, Jeff, some of those conversations that are opposing views, perhaps preferences? I like the way Brian said, let's check our own personal opinions at the door.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. Yeah, it's certainly our organization's been growing, and so we have, like many of you over the last year, had some folks that were on site and working here every day or in some of our retail offices, and some folks that have been working in a remote capacity 100% of the time. And so now with this move, I think it needs to be approached kind of like Brian was referencing earlier, with a great respect for the employee at a very personal level. Folks are productive and engaged with their employers when they feel valued and when they feel a part of the mission and a part of the decision-making process. That does not mean that they will make all of the decision, but it does mean we can make sure their voice is heard. And typically that can occur at a couple of levels, usually with their direct supervisor, to have a very intentional conversation about, you know, what they would like to see, but what are your fears? What are your concerns? What do we have yet to work through? And then also, Brian kind of mentioned this too, is what the accommodations can we make, knowing that, you know, things may not quite go back to the way they were, but yet we know that there is value in in-person work. We know that there is untangible benefits that we get, whether it's a feeling of connectedness with our mission and our teamwork, or our team rather, whether it's that just on-the-spot collaboration that happens all of the time that just isn't going to happen in that environment. But I think, Lynn, at the end of the day, it comes down to, you know, are there multiple levels in the organization engaging with the individual in a respectful way, seeking to understand, and looking to accommodate where they can, so that that individual knows their voice is heard.
Well, and I think you just like hit it on the head. It's the respectful communication. You know, when we look at how we are talking with individuals, Mary, I'm going to throw this one first to you and then back to you, Jeff. When you're managing the people side of all of this, and I think that is what the eye-opening of COVID has done. It has brought us to what individually do we each feel. Everyone on this webinar individually has the memories of when we shut down and what that made us feel like. But then where is it that we're helping our employees see the change that's happening, where we're going, and helping lead the way? Mary, you know, you focus on this every day in your work, and it must be just thrilling, especially with the different companies that you work with.
It is. It's really interesting. Everyone has their own journey, not only as an organization, but as an individual. So ambiguity can be an opportunity or it can be seen as a threat. And so we're obviously looking at the positive approach and looking at how we can use this as a way to really move forward and look at things differently. As already mentioned by Jeff and Brian, you know, talking to the individuals themselves, what are their fears? What are their concerns? We continue to hear a lot about workplace safety. Am I going to be safe? Am I going to stay healthy? What are the things you have in place for me when I come back? If I'm coming back, and how that's going to look. So we're trying to take things from an organizational perspective as well as individual perspective. What are our parameters as a management team? What are you able to do? What is the ultimate upside? What is a minimum that you can do? And really looking at that and really establishing parameters and what we call bumpers. So you know what we're working within and individuals understand. I was just told yesterday by a manager that people are looking for boundaries. They want to know what they have to work within, even from a dress code. We had that discussion yesterday, you know, all these things, technology, if I'm working at home and I'm coming in the office, do I have technology to bring back and forth, and all of the questions that come along with it. So looking at the larger context, looking at the smaller context, and all along the way, it really comes back to really clear, consistent, continuous communication, and what you can give to them now. What is the anchor we can give to individuals as we are kind of traveling through this time of change? What are the things we know? What are the things that they can depend on? And then what are the questions we need to continue to ask? As we've moved through this, we've really said, you know, it's okay to not have the answer. We're acknowledging we don't have the answers to everything. So when we do have the answers, we'll tell you what we know as we go along. Recognize that we're going to try some things. We're going to move some things around. We're going to continue to take your feedback and things that are really great ideas, things that maybe would be concerns, and put those into practice. And if they work out, great. If they don't work out, we're going to continue to move along and make some additional changes. So it's really being able to be flexible, to be adaptable, the communication aspect, the ability to listen and get the individual perspectives. You know, again, it's looking at what do they need to be, what do they need to have to be effective in their role, in their job, in the organization. And that's different. You know, if you're a frontline facing person serving customers, if you're someone that's behind the scenes, really making sure things are happening and keeping technology running, we're looking a lot at what is needed to be successful in your job, and again, what is your personal objective. We've talked to a lot of employees, and especially as we're talking about the job market and what's available to individuals who are looking to change and make a change in what they want to do on a long-term basis. So how can we meet their needs internally? How can we keep them with the organization and continue to challenge them and develop their skill sets? Or do we need to help them along to their other opportunity? We've had individuals who are looking to leave the industry entirely and do something different. They want to do an entrepreneur opportunity or any number of things along the way. So it's really connecting to people. It's looking at their long-term objectives. It's helping them in the really immediate and short term to help them feel comfortable with the change that's happening and giving them the information that we can share so they have confidence in where we are now and what the next short-term bits and pieces will look like, recognizing there'll be continued changes ahead and really helping them look at it as an opportunity. You know, the innovation that we've seen in the last 15 months is amazing, as far as how we work together, how we do work remotely, how we do work with our clients, the technology, just all those things. And so those are the things we want to continue to build upon and have people focus on the positives we can take from this in the last 15 months, and some of the adversity and the ambiguous can be more of a opportunity for change and innovation. So it's really setting the tone and having the dialogue about that.
Mary, you know, one of the things that I've had the joy to watch, Jeff, I'm going to throw this back to you, is that innovation of helping our own members. So we have over 100 and close to 150,000 members. Then we have front facing, as you just said, staff, and then we have back office staff. Well, what is interesting, Jeff, you have really helped navigate the whole component of each of the audiences that we need to talk to. And as we're moving forward, is it different for every day, Jeff? Are you putting on a different hat?
Yeah, I definitely do feel that way, Lynn. This question really kind of took me back a little ways into earlier in the year and not so much forward into what we've got coming. But I do feel like I do wear two different hats sometimes, Lynn, because on one hand, half of the team that I'm responsible to is out there every day, and for the most part has been, and their jobs look very different than they did, but they're still similar enough and they're still in the same settings. On the other hand, we've got a large team in our member services area that have been in a variety of configurations of work, a variety of settings, home, from remote offices right here at our headquarters in the Groves. And so it is interesting as you try to navigate that because it's different for everyone. And, you know, like Mary said, you know, it's really about reaching out and meeting folks where they are. You know, this question to me kind of brought me back to, you know, what are the pillars of change? You know, because if there's one thing we know is that as much change as we have swallowed over the last year, change never slows down. It always speeds up. And so I think back about when the change started to come at a rapid pace, and we had some work to do on our end. And a concrete example, we were shifting, and we decided to rapidly increase the shift from traditional tellers to what you would know as a teller plus or a video teller. And that was the biggest change that many of our members had ever seen in banking in our employees. And so we really had to focus on 4 pillars, which was that really we needed to repeat about 100 times the why of the change, the why at all levels. and to give our team the why for the members. But providing it wasn't really enough. If you've got massive change to engage your team with or your customer base with, you really need to bring them into that change. So we worked quickly at a rapid pace to engage all levels of our organization, not in a what should we do conversation, but hey, what does excellent look like in this vision with this next step? And what are some of the pillars of excellence? And when we did that with our member service staff in our offices, with our management team, with our regional vice presidents, what we found was we answered many of the questions the same way when we were able to bake that into a standard. And it was a standard that our leadership team would have created, certainly, but it was way better than that because it was their standard. Having a standard is not enough. That kind of took us to the third pillar of that, which is it's the old adage, you've got to inspect what you expect. The really neat thing was, as we ran the inspection routines, since the team had said such a high level of buy-in and contribution to what those standards should be, guess what? Yeah, rocket science, right? It was really executed at a very high level. And then finally, the last part, we had to find various ways to celebrate them achieving their own standards. We didn't do everything perfectly. Show me somebody that did over the last year. But I'm really proud of how we've navigated that, and proud of how we've brought our entire team into that conversation of what that change should look like. And as we look forward into this change, I think some of those principles, all those principles will continue to apply.
You know what I love? I love you said the word forward, because what is happening, it sounds like both Mary and Jeff hit on, is that we are helping lead our teams forward, and your team looks different than everybody else's, correct? You personally are working through it yourself, but I love the thought of, it's not about do this, do this, do this. It's how do we build excellence versus, hey, get back into the office. And that is a whole different mentality. Brian, let's head into you. Where there has been great change, we keep talking about change, but where there's been great change is truly the things like we just heard. Okay, might be gaps. Did you get an email about what type of clothing now you're going to wear? How many people, if you stood up right now, perhaps have more of a relaxed, casual look going on, versus that whole thought of what's going on in the performance world. Brian, what have you been seeing, and how important is identifying those gaps?
Yeah, and I'll start by saying I think we're going to have to give each other a lot of grace as we start working in close proximity to other people if you haven't been for a while. So the sorts of things that maybe I've seen some pretty funny skits on people getting back together and not used to working with others so much. But I would really stress engagement and err on the side of over communication. But I think there's also going to be a need for clear expectations as well. So people haven't necessarily thought about a lot of these issues, and something, over the course of a year, there are plenty of things that maybe feel and seem normal in terms of interactions and workflow and schedules that in the workplace setting might not work as well. And so I think setting expectations up front and doing so clearly is important. But before you set the expectations, I also think it's very important to engage and share concerns or pre-identify issues. And as you're setting those policies, doing so in a way that employees feel like they have some ownership in. Whether it's what the expectations are in terms of performance, or just the things as simple as a dress code, or the way that you interact with people, and the way that your workflow is handled in an environment where you're in and around other people, that expressing concerns and then really asking the employee, how would you address this? Here's an outcome that we need. Here's a concern that I have about how things are, or how things are trending. If you were in my position, how would you handle this? The idea of really letting the employees in on the challenges, in on some of, in some cases might be uncomfortable types of conversations, but letting them in on the concerns and then giving them some ownership in the process of solving those concerns. And I think really, I mean, our employees, they know how to do their jobs and they know what the challenges are. And so I think really digging into and making best use of the knowledge, experience, and the background of the people that are doing the work in our organizations day to day is going to result in a much better outcome than if management in various organizations simply tries to answer all of the various questions ahead of time and hands them down to the employees. I really think that more than ever, collaboration is needed now, and tapping into that knowledge and experience of employees and giving them ownership in the answers and the solutions will go a long way to heading off potential conflicts or some of the more uncomfortable conversations about somebody not really understanding what the expectations are as we transition into something that works a little bit more normal than what the last year has looked like.
Brian, the word policy is something that that is in this question, and I think Mary, I'm going to toss it to you. You focus on policy. Yeah, you're laughing on policy, yeah. But honestly, people. I think what you talked about, what all three of you have talked about, is the fact that it isn't about a set in stone policy. It's about the listening, the understanding, and helping empower people. You can't do that if you don't know what you're supposed to do.
Completely. It's all about behavior. What behavior do we want? And we've said, we have adults, let's treat them like adults. We'll get adult behavior. It's a lot what you expect. So we've talked through this. We've had, again, a lot of questions. We have worked with organizations too, a lot of the onboarding, even the new hire, getting the feedback as far as things that have and haven't worked. Looking at what we're getting for questions on a day-to-day basis, kind of doing an FAQ of what people are looking for some guidance. Some of the questions we're hearing about when I'm coming back to the office, if I'm coming back to the office, how is that going to work? Office hours, or again, technology or expectations, all those things. And that's really all those things that drive policy. Policy is really the I don't want to say end result because it keeps changing, but it really is what we're getting from the feedback from other individuals for sure. And we're seeing a lot of changes in how we communicate. So even expectations about agendas for Zoom meetings, or minutes for Zoom meetings, or how do I behave? Do I have my camera on? Do I have my camera off? Those are all things that we've kind of seen over time. And now that we're kind of going to get to the next phase or next piece of in the office, hybrid work, how we're going to connect with each other. These are some of the things that I'm seeing conversations come around, more policy of what are we going to do going forward as we work together? How do we empower people? How do we have some continuity and start putting some plans in place for more consistent interactions with individuals at a different level than we've had in the past?
In marketing, we always say when someone asks a question, that's the time for your ears to perk up.
Yes.
And then ask the question, how many others are asking the same question?
Exactly.
Yeah, Jeff, have you found that to be true with all of the different audiences that you serve?
Yeah, absolutely, Lynn. There is, there's just some natural, if you think back to your first job, or maybe it was your second job, or the job that you were a year into, and especially for our younger employees, they don't want to make waves, and they don't want to act like they don't know. They don't want to feel like, am I the only person that feels this way about this question? So many times they won't ask that question, and they'll do as we ask them to do to our detriment. Meaning if you've got an employee that is stressed and worried and concerned, we haven't asked the right questions to draw that out of them, and they proceed without sharing that with us, work is not the number one thing on their mind that day. And maybe finding a new job becomes that number one thing. So yeah, there's a significant risk in that. And if you don't pay attention to what one of your team members is telling you, you might have 100 thinking the same thing.
Well, go ahead, Mary.
As I say, I think this all relates back to culture too, and what you want from culture. And because all these things develop into culture, and that's changed. I know a lot of organizations have had a lot of new people hired in a different scenario than what had been historically. There's not that person-to-person, day-to-day touch base. So you get the feeling of the culture. It's more of a remote. So again, as we're looking at the future and how we want to interact together, what behavior we want, what we want the organization to feel like and be like, these expectations, the policies, the training, those are the things that are going to help establish culture going forward for sure.
When
Know,
we,
Lynn,
oh,
and
go ahead,
even
Brian.
even though I'm obviously not a new employee to SBM, I've been here for 2.5 years, and so I've been acclimated, but even there's certain expectations that were set over the last year, and then things are changing right now. And just as an example, just this week, there was a meeting, and it's kind of rare, but a meeting that I had confirmed to be a part of, to attend, that I just assumed was virtual, because almost all of my meetings are virtual. I missed it. 5 minutes before it came up, I brought up the appointment and thinking that, I'm going to click a link and I'll be in the meeting. And surprise, everybody else was meeting. It was a small meeting. Everybody else was meeting in person, and it was in the calendar invite. I just, that the expectations are starting to slowly change, and that's why I think we'd have to give each other some grace here to kind of get back into it and make some mistakes, and drawing out those questions that people are maybe concerned to ask or admit that they don't know or they don't understand. Or here's the other thing is, there's going to be some employees that have really strong opinions on some of this stuff. And so when you have some louder voices that are saying, here's how I want it to be, then there are other employees that have a different point of view, a different perspective, and especially if they're newer, are not going to feel comfortable saying, actually, I have a different opinion than that. I'm not exactly comfortable with the way that was laid out there. Here's how I'd rather see it. So I think that it really is incumbent upon people who run organizations or manage organizations to ensure that you're hearing from everybody and not just the ones that are kind of bold and forceful in their opinions. And you might find that there's more diverse opinions than you think, because a lot of the conversation tends to be dominated by a relatively small number of people. It's just human nature in almost any group setting of people. There'll be some that kind of take over and dominate, and others that are a part of that maybe spend a little less comfortable inserting themselves into that process.
So really asking the questions of all of the different employees and where they are setting right now. It's just so unique. That brings us to how employees are feeling. And right now we know that in the state of Michigan, all over, unemployment, people just aren't wanting to come back to work, it looks like. And yet we have such career growth opportunities. Do you think that because of COVID, I'll start with you, Jeff. Do you think that because of COVID, people are feeling like there's not paths of growing careers?
Yeah, it's interesting, Lynn, because it seems to be a big period of reevaluation for folks. And as I look at that, and we're not immune to that, but I do think, what are some things that we can do to continue to bolster our employees to help them grow in their careers? What we've seen and what the Consumers Credit Union has really made a big bet on is that if I'm excited to come to work every day, it's likely because, at least one of the reasons, is that I've got a path forward. Our folks come here to grow. They don't want to come to that role, typically, that they've come to the credit union for forever. They want to see that there's a path for them to grow in their careers, whether that's their income, their knowledge, their expertise, their network. It may be different for everybody. So our jobs as leaders is to provide them an opportunity to do it. For us, it's kind of a four-step process, really, is we establish from day one that they own their career growth, which means that they need to create what that looks like for them. Now, many times they don't know. They say, I want to grow. I think I want to grow in this area, but I don't really know. So what we've done is we've built in checkpoints 3 times a year where the entire focus of the engagement is not on their performance, but in what they're doing to grow themselves. So that's their job. our job then, kind of the second part of this, as leaders, when we come to that discussion, is to say, hey, that's great that that Brian, that you want to grow in business services, but you work over here in mortgage. So have you gotten to know our products? Have you gotten to know our pricing? Have you gotten to know a few folks in that area and just had some conversation with them? Maybe those are the next steps for you, and really to help them hone in into something that is maybe more appropriate for where they're at, but it's more importantly more meaningful. And I'll give you an example of that. There was once upon a time that we really invested heavily in, well, if you're interested in growing in that area, go shadow with them. That was a terrible idea. What happened was that new individual who was nowhere near being ready for that role came in, knew nothing about that role, knew nothing about that area sometimes, and now they've got, they've taken the time of a professional that's there to serve our members. And our people are kind, so they did it, but it put them behind and stressed them out. So we try to be a little more thoughtful into how we can help somebody grow themselves, whether that's in-house or out-of-house. I think that the next thing is that since we've built in these checkpoints and they've taken the place of our annual reviews really on how they're going to help build that employee's career so that they feel like they are moving forward. Because if they feel they're moving forward, they will give you their best effort in the area that they're at. Is that we've had to say, okay, well, if we took the performance review out, how do we do the performance review? And the answer for us, at least, was pretty straightforward. First, I think we overthought it, was we'll do the performance review every day as they need it. Whether that's, Lynn, you do a great job with that search engine optimization. That's incredible work. How did you do it? Tell me about it. Or Lynn, hey, we got to have a conversation. That marketing campaign last week, you didn't really meet my expectations. So we had to get a lot more straightforward and give that daily feedback. Well, that's so much better than a performance review anyway, because you're getting feedback now versus how many of us have said, I wish I would have known this sooner. I could have done something about it. And then the final component is, hey, you know what? Is there an opportunity for me to try on clothes, to try on a role within this organization? So we created our Grab a Project and Grab an Assignment role. These are defined responsibilities where we say, hey, Lynn, that's great. You want to come work in marketing for a while, even though your job is over there in member services? That's great. We got a job for you. It's going to be this long. Typically, they're about 90 days. It's going to have a start and a stop. You're going to work for marketing for 90 days. This is the job you're going to do. After that job, you're going to go back to your other job. But you're going to know a lot more. You're going to be a lot more marketable. Maybe you'll know that you hate it and you don't ever want to do it again. You'll know people in the department, and you'll have an opportunity to impress them with the work you're going to do for them. And somewhere between 25 and 50% of those actually do end in an offer for that individual to join that area. It's been incredibly successful for us. Of course, we have to build budgeting for it because you got to backfill that role. But it's just been really powerful as far as helping folks explore things and grow their career. And even if it's not the thing for them, their organization gave them a shot and an experience that they will never forget. It's something I'm really proud of here.
Jeff, it really does work. And I think that every single day communication is what we've been talking about all along. Brian, I'm gonna just say to everybody, give me a little bit of grace, because all of a sudden there's a lot of construction going on around me downtown. So if you hear that, I will be muting so that it's not bothering anybody. But Brian, tell us about what your organization is doing, as there's growth, but also as there's times where people just haven't seen each other and they're not knowing, how can my path stay growing forward? Yeah.
And by the way, that's economic activity, Lynn, in the background, music to my ears. I think everything that Jeff said is just so insightful. And I just think some great nuggets in there to pull out and to put to practical use. Let me raise one issue that I think is actually a threat to employees growing in their careers, is that as we move back into in-person work with some component, and it's highly likely that some component of almost every industry will remain remote, is that not being present in the place of business where many of the decisions are made, where the relationships are formed, where the comfort levels are developed, where the culture is most apparent, and people just form personal relationships. That what I'm concerned about is that those who work remotely might kind of inadvertently take themselves out of career growth opportunities. And I think we're gonna have to be pretty intentional about not letting that happen. So for people who, for whatever reason, it makes more sense for them to be remote, I think it's going to be natural for them to get passed over or skipped over when it comes to career growth opportunities. And so I'll get back to my favorite word, which is intentional, that we can't just assume that the ones who are working remotely are not interested in growing in their careers, and those who are there in person are just, they're going to be naturally better positioned. And so I think that needs to be part of the discussion. Is it possible, when you're talking about different levels or types of positions in an organization, is it possible to set yourself up to be qualified or make yourself as likely as possible to get one of those roles if you're working mostly remotely? And I think we owe it to our employees to tell them that, look, to understand, if your career path is to go here, we've got to get you to know you better. You're going to have to do the type of work that puts you in the team, in the mix, so that you're kind of immersed in the culture of the organization. And that might not be necessary for every organization, but if there's one thing, as I look at a whole generation of people that are in the workforce that either all they know is remote, or they've become very comfortable in a remote work environment, and they can perform in that remote work environment, that they might not realize that they're taking themselves out of a career track, or at least making that career track less likely because of it. So just something to think of in terms of understanding the goals of the individuals, and ensuring that they understand that part of that in-person component to the work may be very important to their future as it comes to being considered for promotions or additional responsibilities.
So I think that has a lot to do with workplace equity. I think equity has obviously been a big topic, more so in the last 15 months. And I think this is another version of equity. And I think that's going to be a lot of work that organizations have to do to identify, again, part of their process, part of the policy. How am I looking across the organization, looking across the individuals? I think another piece of that is, we're hearing about organizations hiring remote employees at any different level. And a lot of those are high level management positions. So how do you get them engaged with that culture? So it goes a lot back to process, a lot how you communicate, how you're meeting, developing, looking at your career ladders, looking at what the next steps are, being very intentional in those conversations and those development. And this is a really, really good time to talk to your current employees about, again, where do they want to be long-term? What is their really, their vision of where they want to be? Because they may have changed over the last 15 months. Maybe they have different aspirations than what they did previously. Some organizations don't have as many positions to travel to or across, and so it's more a job enrichment or enhancement, or taking on, like you said, different projects and things. So these are all different things. I think the complexity of where we're heading from where we've come is definitely going to have all these conversations, but being really intentional about having that equity across the organization and giving people the opportunities to be part of the conversation, be part of the meeting space, and setting those up. It's all part of that. How do we set up technology to make that happen? How do we set up, our meeting structure to make that happen?
Mary, it brings back to that intentionality that
Exactly.
Brian focused on, being intentional about helping your own team grow.
Yep.
But also knowing that there's sometimes that you might have to back up and have those difficult conversations about, growing may have to happen in person. It's just one of the things that we know about. It's like what we talked about right at the beginning. Jeff, you brought up something that I think this is getting on to one of our last questions as we wrap up. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please do so in the Q&A and we'll be glad to answer those. But I love the way that you wrote this question, Jeff. It says, when it comes to your business's mission, how do you help your employees buy into the level of missionaries rather than mercenaries? And it brings up that us versus them, which is such it's like a hamster wheel. Just don't even start. Let's really focus on the mission. Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. And I can't take credit. I'm sure somebody way smarter than me said this, and it just kind of resonated. You know, as I think about retention, and Brian mentioned, you know, the unemployment market is very low, or rate is very low. There's plenty of opportunities out there. Some of those are remote, and you know, maybe that appeals to a certain aspect to your team. And then there's this period of reevaluation that a lot of folks are entering into. And it seems to me that, and I think our organization has made a bet on this, that the best way to keep employees is to keep them on fire for what you do. Okay, that's a pretty high level of commitment. That means every employee in your organization, ideally, would feel like an owner, would feel like it's theirs, would feel that passionately about it. There are owners in businesses probably on this podcast today who could go and make a lot more money working for somebody else. They would never do that because they're fired up and wired up about what they do every day. Talent's not enough. Ownership will trump talent every time. We see that all the time. That energy level, that buy-in is going to exceed, you know, previous experience. It's going to exceed just raw talent at times, because that energy is going to contribute after talent has decided that that's enough for the day. So we've placed a huge premium on ownership here at the credit union. And that really rolls down to four things. Is first of all, when we look for employees, and this is really hard right now, I'm just going to stress this, we want the right people with just the right amount of ego, which means that they're confident enough to be willing to take some risks and do some things that are out of their comfort zone, like this webcast, Lynn, that you asked me to do, which is outside of my comfort zone. Thank you. But also that they're not too ego-driven. It's not all I, and me, and what's next for me, because they got to fit in around here. And you know, you also have to engage multiple levels of the organization, we feel, to make a candidate successful. Number one, they may spot something in a level 2 or level 3 interview that you didn't in the beginning. And also, when that person arrives, guess what? They've met a dozen people here who all said we should hire them. Those dozen people are now obligated because they said yes, help that person succeed. And finally, you got to be willing to lose some candidates sometimes. This is a long process for us, and we lose candidates every hire. Good candidates who would be a good fit, but we're slow. We're intentionally slow because we want the right fit, because we know the worst thing we could do is make the wrong selection. That's going to be a lot more pain long term. And finally, we drive this with questions based around our values. So one of the things that we believe in around here is to be purposeful. And being purposeful means I need to be able to get feedback so I could be more purposeful tomorrow and on the next time through. But if I can't take feedback worth beans, that's not going to jive. So you could ask me, hey, Jeff, how do you take feedback? I take feedback great, Lynn. Or you could say, hey, Jeff, and this is a question we use frequently, which is, tell me about a time you received some feedback, it was uncomfortable for you, and what'd you do with it? So we try to drive our questions around our values. Kind of the second thing is, when we think about how to create ownership, our routines and rituals. We have some things we do at the credit union. Some are just silly. And I'll give you an example. When you get manager around here, when you get promoted to that manager role, you have to sing in front of your peers and do the motions. I'm a little teapot, short and stout. Here is my handle. Here is my spout. I'm never doing it right. And it's not designed to humiliate, but it's because one of our values is servant leadership. Our leaders are there to serve their team, and so it reminds them of that. It creates a connection with our team and with each other. Kind of the next bucket of this is that it has to be an environment where it's safe to fail. If we want people to be empowered owners in the organization, we've got to give them a leash. We've got to give them some empowerment. Say, you think you can drive things there? Go for it. Try to drive some results. Well, guess what? That's not all going to work out for us. In fact, most of them are not going to work out for us. It's okay to say afterwards, hey, what did we learn? What would we do differently if we were starting all over? Should we start all over? Or did we learn that, nope, that doesn't work? And then let's celebrate that. Let's celebrate our willingness to try new things. And It's easy to kill that, by the way. You just have to have a few critical words after somebody had a new idea. Finally, this is something that's close to my heart, is, Gallup tells us that 78% of an employee's engagement is derived by their relationship with their supervisors. This is a number they've proven year after year and decade after decade. If you don't have a real relationship with the people that report to you, you're never going to create folks who have that high level of buy-in. This is hard work. This is knowing details. This is fun work, but this is time. This is knowing the spouse's name and the birthday and what they're doing this weekend and what's new in their life and what are their hopes and dreams and goals and boy, what's tearing them apart inside. And it's developed over time and it's developed with intention. So those are a few of the things, Lynn, that I think contribute to helping employees, and our organization does, help employees buy into the level that it's theirs. And nothing creates retention like that.
It's passion, isn't it? It's passion that your team can feel every single day. Brian and Mary, let's wrap up with you guys. Start with you, Brian. Just wrap up on the day. What a wonderful webinar to talk about everything that we are talking about day to day, aren't we right now? It is on top of mind.
It really is. And I think that the topic that Jeff just kind of left us with is one that we could really do well to take to heart. The idea of understanding, for every role in an organization, organizations have big purposes that are made up of a bunch of people doing small things. And so if we think about our role as being just this little compartment in a bigger process, then it might not, it might be hard to get excited about it. But when you think about that role that you play is an integral part of this really important thing, like setting that context. In some ways, it's in some lines of work, it's a little easier than others to get people really excited about what they're doing. But I think of it as if I'm making car parts, it's about mobility and helping people. The world does not work without people being able to move efficiently between places. So you think about that role. I've got a production job, but my job is necessary for society to work the way that it works. Here at the Small Business Association of Michigan, it's one of the advantages that we have. It's a mission-driven organization. It's the success of small business. Within this, this role though, there are some jobs like mine that are high profile and dealing with government and policies and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of support that happens in order for me to be successful, and in the public facing part of it. And that's so key. And if you're not willing as an organization to share, acknowledge, and celebrate the fact, and it is a fact, that the part that the public sees would never be possible if it wasn't for the talent, determination, and dedication of the team that is supporting the day-to-day roles of the blocking and tackling of this organization. So yeah, I think that really giving people, trying to help people keep that flame or that fire, that passion for the mission in the broader context of the importance of the work is more important today maybe than it's ever been.
Mary, you have in your title, which I love, and I think this is a great way to wrap up, is experience consultant. And it's all about experiences, isn't it? Not only those that you work with, but also those that you're bringing your services to.
For sure. And we always want to have the story to tell, right? So we want to hear from every individual what their story is, where they've come from, where they want to go, and how we can be part of each chapter of their journey. So we're really, it's what I love to do is really find that fit, find the win for each person in the organization, and help them connect the dots along the way, because it is all about the experience and empowering people for their purpose, right, and what they want to do and what they are good at, and finding that and finding the fit.
Well, today has been just a wealth of information. Thank you very much, Jeff and Mary and Brian. If you have any information or have resources that you'd like to be sent to you, just give us connect with us, because we are here for you. That's our goal, is to try to work together as we are moving forward into getting back into that office. So whether it's connecting with consumers, the Small Business Association of Michigan, or Progressive A&E, we are here to help. Thank you again for joining us today. Thank you so much for our panel members' wealth of experience. And next week, we have another group that is just powerful as we talk about the power of place. And that is really designing the spaces that support the workforce. So it's a very exciting time. Join us next week and don't forget to register. Also live on Facebook at Small Business Association of Michigan, Thursday, May 20th. Jeff, Mary, Brian, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you next week.